Welcome, everybody. There are a few seats here right in the middle, unfortunately. The desk is broken, but it's still a seat.
Is that one fine there? And there's one there and there's one there.
One there, okay. So this is Astronomy and Integrative Biology C13 with the modest goal of covering origins from the beginning of the universe till the present day and into the future. My name is Elliot Quattert. I'm a professor here in astronomy and physics. Just to give you some context, I'm a theoretical astrophysicist, so that means I don't actually know how to use a telescope, or I don't go observing or anything like that. I mostly, sit in my office, maybe with a computer, doing calculations. So when we do some observing during the semester, I'm going to have to bring in other people to help out because I'm not very good at that. This is Charles Marshall.
So I'm Charles Marshall. I'm in the Department of Integrative Biology. I'm also the director of the University of California Museum of Paleontology. We're the largest university collection of fossils in the world, as well as being the chair of the Berkeley Natural History Museums and co-director of the Berkeley Initiative of Global Change Biology. So I've got a lot of different fingers and different pies. I think also Elliot is also director of the theoretical, what is it?
Astrophysics Center, yes.
Right.
So we also wanted to introduce the graduate student instructors who are going to play a very important role in the class. So here's Melanie up front, and June, Camilla, Caitlin, and Tom. So they're going to be leading the 2-hour weekly sections where you do some hands-on learning of how science actually works. So just to get a feel for the class, so how many of you are freshmen?
Wow.
How many of you, is this your first class ever in college?
Oh, wow.
All right.
Oh, welcome and congratulations.
Yeah. How many sophomores? Juniors?
Wow.
Seniors? Okay. How many people are not thinking of majoring in the sciences? Okay, good. So this class is very much geared towards you. It really is meant to be a course for non-science majors to give you a feel for some of the science of understanding our origins. That means that it's not going to be a technically very involved class in the sense of huge amounts of math and things like that. But it is a conceptually difficult class in the sense we're going to be grappling with a lot of conceptually difficult material from astronomy, physics, geology, biology. And so in that sense, it's going to be challenging because you're going to have to grapple with a variety of different concepts.
So consistent with that then, given that you're non-majors, please, if there's terms that you just don't understand, simple ones like giga annum, put your hand up and ask. Keep up with us. It also helps us know when we're pushing too far into the unknown. So please, I know there is a lot of you. Also, what works well is usually one of us sits there while the other one's speaking, and we actually keep an eye on each other, where one of us is a spotter. And so I'll go like that, and then go, oh yeah, there it is. So anyway, so please, ask questions, put your hand up, keep your hand up high. It's a little bit hard to see everybody all at once.
And do feel free to ask questions both about things you don't understand, clarification, whatever, in the class. We'll generally try to answer them. If we're running out of time, we may say kind of wait till the end of the class, but our goal is very much to try to answer your questions as we go. So, anything else for now? We'll get to the syllabus and things like that in just a second.
So any questions? We'll get to the syllabus and everything in a moment. Okay.
So a couple of practical things. The course is cross-listed between astronomy and biology, so you can either sign up for Astronomy C13 or Integrative Biology C13, and it doesn't matter which you sign up for. They're the same. And it doesn't affect which breadth requirement you can satisfy. So independent of whether you sign up for biology or astronomy, the course counts for either your physical sciences or your biological sciences breadth requirement. So that is just a kind of way it is cross-listed, but in practice that really doesn't matter. This course is actually part of a program that started last year that's called the Big Ideas Program, which is specifically meant to bring together faculty from different departments to present different viewpoints of conceptually related material. So in our case, that's different ways of thinking about the science of origins from the astronomy, geology, and biology perspectives. There are other interesting courses on, philosophy of art, on music, on a variety of different topics. So this is something I'd encourage you to look at, is just the range of courses that are offered through the Big Ideas program. So we wanted to start by providing a little bit of broader context for the general questions that we're going to be tackling with in this class. Because the kind of questions about origins that we're going to be looking at are not questions that are unique to science. They're questions that, as far back as we have information about different cultures, be it cave paintings, pottery, written documentation, oral histories, etc., it's clear that questions about our origins, how we as a species, how the Earth, etc., came to be, are questions that people have grappled with really since we have recorded information. So this is an example of the Greek origins myth. The notion of Gaia really appears in the Greek origins myth. This is a painting showing the creation of man by Prometheus, and then Prometheus created man out of clay, and then Athena really endowed us with reason and thought. This is an example of kind of a Western origin story, but it's not, the notion of origin stories are not unique, of course, to Western culture. This is an example from the Maori, who are the indigenous people in New Zealand. There's many common themes in origin stories across cultures. The creation of something from nothing, from darkness into light. In many cases, the work of supernatural gods as playing an important role in our origins. So these ideas not only are of historical interest, but they actually continue to have a very large impact on the modern world. So to give you a few examples, many of what are considered, right, the kind of pinnacle of artistic achievement are really related to origin stories. So this is the roof of the Sistine Chapel painted by Michelangelo, and this is the creation of Adam by God. And this really, if you ask about the kind of greatest artistic achievements of Western civilization, this is really considered to be one of them. It's not just the kind of dusty historical culture. This also plays a significant role in, more modern culture. So Ridley Scott had the Aliens prequel, Prometheus, a few years ago, and the name of the movie, right, Prometheus, was really meant to invoke this notion of beginnings or origins. In this case, where did the crazy killer aliens come from? But it's the same basic idea that he was trying to evoke. It's not just culture and art, but in many societies, there's actually a very significant influence on education, on politics, on government of the kind of origins, historical origin story. So in the United States, this is a Gallup poll from a few years ago. If you do a poll and you ask people what is their view of our origins, human beings' origins, right, what you find is that over, roughly about half of the people think that God created humans in their present form with no significant role for evolution by natural selection. Only about 15% of people actually think that humans evolved with no significant role of a supernatural being. And then somewhere in between, about a third of people think of something in between where there's both a role for a supernatural creator and a role for evolution by natural selection. This factors into the education. So some of you may have actually seen this firsthand. There's about 6 states right now that explicitly teach either criticisms of evolution or aspects of creationism, or what is known as intelligent design, as part of high school science curriculum. And this is a very contentious local political battle in some states that's led to a lot of major lawsuits, right, as to what really does the science curriculum need to include. Does it include evolution? Does it include creationism? Does it, quote, teach the controversy, unquote? And in polls of teachers, something like 12%, 1 out of 8 or so, of teachers admit to teaching creationism as scientifically credible on par with evolution. And those are the teachers that admit to doing it, and it's probably the ones that do it is actually probably larger than that. And so this is just to say that it's not just a kind of historical interest in terms of the impact on culture or art. It really still has a significant influence on education, politics, etc. In the last election, John Huntsman was one of the candidates for president, and he got in a huge amount of trouble for what to me seems like a rather innocuous statement. I'm a scientist, but it seems like a rather innocuous statement. I believe in evolution and I trust scientists on global warming. Call me crazy. So our goal, what we want to do is really teach you what our scientific understanding of origin is, what some of the evidence for that is, why do scientists believe what they do, what the scientific process is, so that you can really make an informed decision. So when you read newspaper articles about the controversy, when you see lawsuits about teaching of evolution in high school or middle school, you'll be well informed about the underlying science and able to make your own judgment about the situation. So a little bit now about practical things. So we're going to use B Courses, which is the Berkeley kind of website for classes for this course. The course is called Astronomy/IB C13 on B Courses. That's used for all the reading assignments, homeworks, links to YouTube videos, etc. We request that you do not use your laptop or cell phone in class. On the course syllabus, there's actually a link to some research articles that have documented that using your laptop to take notes in courses leads to students who learn less than if you either sit there and listen or take notes by hand. And so our reason for asking you not to use these is because there's growing scientific research that this actually hinders your ability to learn the material. So that's the motivation for this. Okay, so just a little bit more about the website.
Now, the Bryson is not on the website, right?
Yeah, sorry. Good. So the Bryson book, which is a book, Bill Bryson actually has written mostly non-science books. He has a book on the Appalachian Trail, on things around the house. But he's also written this extremely good science book on our origins called A Brief History of Nearly Everything. So that's the required book for the course. There are 2 versions, the special illustrated edition and the regular non-special edition. If you can get the special illustrated edition, we'd encourage you. They did a great job of getting, really good pictures, illustrating some of the topics. But the readings in Bryson are listed for both versions of the textbook. And then what we'll do is post additional readings as scanned PDF files on the website. So Bryson is particularly good at providing kind of historical summary of how we got to the current scientific view. And the additional readings will supplement that in many cases with a little bit more about what the current scientific view is. Yep? So the question was, should you bring the book to class? There's no reason you need to bring the book to class. Also, there's always a question, do you need to read the readings beforehand or afterwards? And I think there definitely are advantages to reading the readings beforehand. I think the lectures will make a little bit more sense. But if you prefer to read the readings afterwards, that's also fine. It's kind of, we leave that up to you with perhaps some encouragement that there are advantages to doing the readings in advance.
I think the advantage of reading beforehand is we have, there will be some technical words. So if you've seen them and read them already, it will give you less jar if you see a word you've never seen before on the screen. So I would recommend reading them beforehand. But your call.
Yep. So this is the website for the class. So you go to the home page is just a brief description, a couple of pictures. Then if you go on the left-hand panel here to syllabus, you'll actually get the syllabus for the class. So this includes on the syllabus a summary of the readings for the semester. You can download this or just open it within the B Courses website. So it includes basically lecture by lecture what the readings are. I should note that this may get tweaked a little bit as we go, so don't download the PDF once and forget to look at it. Updates ever again, so we may update this once in a while, and if we do update it, we'll generally let you know. But so this includes both the readings in Bryson. So for instance, next time there's actually no readings in Bryson. The readings are instead scanned readings from an intro astronomy textbook. You can find those scanned readings here in the files section where they're organized by week. So week 0 is the first week today. Week 1 is next week. And so there, for week 1, you have PDF files of all of the readings for next week. Okay. There's also a list of what the topics are for each lecture and each section. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how do we approach the subject of Orans from the scientific perspective. The next few lectures will give you kind of an overview of astronomy and of biology from kind of especially the point of view of thinking about origins, etc. We've made an effort to interweave throughout the course the geological, astronomical, and biological aspects of the course. That includes in some lectures, both of us will talk about different aspects of the material, or, in this case, there's a couple of lectures a little bit more astronomical, and then a couple of lectures that are a little more biological and geological, so we're kind of going back and forth from both perspectives. So our email addresses, there's an email list. If you email origins-staff@list.berkeley.edu, which you can get on the website, that goes to Charles, myself, and all the GSIs. So you can kind of email that one email list a question, and then whoever can answer it first will get back to you. Few more things. So as I said, here's if you want to read up on this research article about the kind of negative effects of using laptops to take notes in class, feel free to do so. There's other articles referred to in that article. The discussion sections you've already signed up for. They're in 3007 Valley Life Sciences. They're mandatory, so attendance is required. We'll come back. Charles will say a little bit more about the sections in just a second, so I'll hold off on talking more about that. So office hours, there's a couple of different forms that office hours take. The graduate student office hours are going to be in the evenings, Thursdays and Monday evenings, in the same room as the sections. And they're intended to be kind of a group discussion. So the idea is that hopefully many students will show up to those office hours. If you have questions about the material, you can talk to each other. Science is very much a collaborative process where you learn not from the experts, but mostly when you do science, you learn on your own, or you learn interacting with colleagues, trying to figure something out. And so the idea of this office hours is in part to have you be able to get together with your fellow students as a group and grapple with questions about the homework or questions about the material. The graduate students will be there to help out, but also hopefully you'll be interacting and learning from your fellow students. If you want a one-on-one meeting with a graduate student, if you feel more comfortable in that venue, you should feel free to email them to arrange a time. Charles and I have office hours listed here where you can come by, ask us questions. If you can't make those times, feel free to send us an email to arrange another time. So as I already said, the readings are both from Bryson and additional scanned PDFs. That's listed on that PDF file towards the top of the syllabus. So a little bit about the grading for the class. So the grading includes 10%, which is your participation and engagement and attendance with the section material. 40% is the weekly homeworks. The homeworks will include questions that are drawn from what you do in section that week. 20% is an in-class midterm, and then 30% is the final exam. The exams, of course, are required. If you miss the exam, you'll get a 0. If you miss the midterm, you'll get a 0 for the midterm. If you miss the final, you'll get an incomplete. If some medical emergency comes up and you suddenly have to miss the midterm or the final, that's, of course, fine. If it's an emergency and you have a note from your doctor, etc.
So we emphasize that if you find yourself suddenly in trouble with the midterm or the final exam, try to contact us as soon as possible. If you contact us a week later and say, oh, I was sick,
right,
that's different from contacting as soon as you can so we know that there's a problem so we can accommodate that. So let us know as soon as you know or as soon as you are able.
Okay, good. And if you are on an athletic team or some Berkeley group where you're going to be out of town for the midterm, so hopefully you won't be, but if you are, let us know immediately so we can try to make...
And also for sections.
Also for sections, yes. We can try to make alternative arrangements.
Also, finally, we are trying to get another room for the midterm and the final, because this is going to be pretty squeezy. So fingers crossed we'll find something.
Yeah, thank you. Good. So the homeworks are due at the beginning, which is not the end, it's the beginning. The beginning of class Tuesdays. So the beginning of Tuesday lecture, we'll basically have you hand in your homeworks in a pile up where there's a desk up there, and then the graduate students will pick it up right at the beginning of lecture. And it really is due promptly. We're not going to be accepting late homeworks.
And the first homework will be due, not this coming Tuesday, but the next one.
Right. So thank you. So September 9th will be the first homework. So not next Tuesday, but the following one after that. We fully understand that during the semester, sometimes things are really busy. You have a huge amount of work in other classes. You have a midterm in another class, and you can't quite get to the homework. And so the way we try to take that into account is that we're not going to accept late homeworks, but what we are going to do is simply drop your lowest homework. So if one of the weeks you're just too busy, you can't get to it, you don't do a good job on it, that's fine. That homework grade will simply get dropped and not counted towards your final grade. As part of the homeworks, we're going to have both what's called a star party and a fossil party. So a star party is for the... How many of you have never looked through a telescope? Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
That's actually not bad. Okay. So meaning many of you actually already have. So the STAR party is basically to make sure that after you've taken an astronomy class, you've actually looked through a telescope and seen a few astronomical objects. The homework questions will be, not complicated. It'll be like, what did you see? And things like that. So, this is required but easy. And likewise, the Museum of Paleontology is astonishing here. How many millions of specimens?
About 6.
6 million fossil specimens. And so there'll be kind of a tour of the Museum of Paleontology where you see some of the extraordinary specimens that are housed there. Lastly, there'll be 2 optional field trips. So one is the University of California operates 2 major observatories with a number of telescopes. One is outside San Jose, and one is in Hawaii. So guess which one we get to go on the field trip? Okay. So we're going on the field trip to the observatory outside of San Jose, which is called Lick Observatory. It actually houses about a dozen professional telescopes that astronomers use for their research. We'll get to see a bunch of different telescopes, actually look through the original telescope, which was built there in the 1800s. Mount Hamilton outside of San Jose, on a clear day, you can see the Monterey Bay all the way up to San Francisco. So you get an amazing view of the entire Bay Area if it's not foggy. Okay. So this is an optional field trip. There is a vague, small extra credit towards your section and participation grade to encourage you if you're kind of on the borderline, not sure you want to go. That's to give you a little push in the direction of going. There's also a optional field trip to the Cal Academy of Sciences, which is really one of the top science museums in the world. This is in San Francisco. They have an amazing set of displays that includes a reproduction of a rainforest, complete with rainforest birds and frogs. There's an aquarium with sharks and manta rays. And it's actually a world-class research institution for the biological sciences. So we'll get to see some of the behind-the-scenes research that's done there and then get access to the museum to see a number of the really impressive exhibits. Okay. Lastly, last year, Berkeley adopted an honor code that we will follow ourselves, the GSIs will follow, and we expect you to follow. So I encourage you to take a look at this. Yep, question? The dates for the field trip are being sorted out because we need to sort it out with the 2 locations, and we'll let you know as soon as possible what those dates are. Yep. Yep. Is there a cost associated with the field trips? There's no cost associated with the field trips.
If someone has, let's say, a perfect attendance with this
The question is if you have a perfect attendance. So just to be clear, the lab grade is not just attendance. It's attendance and participation. You're going to be doing group works, figuring stuff out in real time, and if you just sit there and not engage, that will factor into your attendance and participation. If you have a perfect attendance and participation grade, which students definitely did have last year, this will still count as a little bit of extra credit. Yes.
But not much.
Not much, yes.
I mean, it's
not much, little bit. Yep. Anything else? So that's all I wanted to say on the syllabus. Okay. So now Charles is going to say a few things about the sections.
So we just want to talk briefly about the sections. Both Elliot and I felt very strongly that this is a science course and that in the end, the data for science comes from the real world, not from lectures, not from textbooks. And so we wanted to give you some exposure to the actual real world that bears on the questions of origins, from the Big Bang to the emergence of humans. And so what we did is we spent an awful lot of time last year, and during the first year we taught this course, developing a set of sections for you that we hope will be scientific enough to be informative, but not so complex that it's too difficult. So it's incredibly difficult to come up with the right balance there. So for us, the sections are a major component of the course along with the lectures, and that's why we made them required. And so the idea is to give you a feel for the nature of science and for the science of origins. And so I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking or asking the question, what is science? For a lot of people, science is about facts or the truth. For me, it is not. Facts are really dull and uninteresting. 5 fingers, that's a fact. It's true. Facts and truth is really dull and boring and uninteresting. What really makes science compelling and interesting, at least to us, is basically the component of storytelling. So I view science as storytelling. Now, it's a special type of storytelling. It is compelling. And why is it compelling? Because we believe it's true. It's based on evidence and reasoning. But I think most people leave out of the equation when they think about science the fact that there's something we want to know, and we want to know it reliably. And so one of the goals of this course is to try to give you that flavor of the fundamental nature of science and scientific knowing. And of course, it hinges critically on facts and observations and truths, but those do not science make. So that's one of the things that we wish to try to convey in this course. Sorry, I need glasses and I can't read the slides anymore. Another way of characterizing the nature of science is making maps into the unknown. If you come across a new continent that's never been discovered before and you want to characterize it, you want to make a map of it so other people then can follow their map and understand it. And so one of the peculiar things about teaching in a university is that at the undergraduate level, most of you do courses that are based on learning about existing maps and learning how to read them. Mathematics, physics, chemistry, anatomy, biochemistry, whatever it is. But for us as scientists, our job is actually the making of new maps into the unknown. It's a completely and utterly different process than learning how to read somebody's existing map. You can all look up Google Maps and go somewhere, that's fine. But how do you come up with a map in the first place that can get you somewhere where no one has yet been? So that's one of the ways in which I think the teaching of science operates. So at the undergraduate level, we're trying to give you a feel for a little bit of that map-making process while giving you a sense of the maps that we've currently built. For your graduate student GSIs, they're in graduate school because they are learning and beginning to make maps of their own that contribute to our collective knowledge. So your graduate students are a lot more than simply undergraduates who are ahead of you. They've actually begun this process of being active map makers. And so in that sense, they're all extraordinarily good. They will give you a perspective on the science of origins that, say, a first-year undergraduate might not be able to give. So the science of origins is especially difficult. And the reason why it's especially difficult is because most origins only happen once. They're unique. The origin of the universe, the origin of the earth, the origin of life, your own birth, your own history. And so often, in order to understand the world in a scientific way, we need to be able to repeat things to get a sense of what really matters, what's really critical. Very, very hard to do if you only have one origin. And it's especially hard if that origin is a long way in the distant past. Because getting evidence of it is very, very difficult, rather than saying being able to create life over and over and over and over and over again in the lab, or create universes over and over and over again in the lab. So they're rare events, and they've happened a long time ago. And so this makes the science of origins especially interesting and especially compelling. And I think particularly astronomers and paleontologists are especially interested in those really, really hard scientific questions, because the storytelling is much more difficult than simple lab-based chemistry, for example. So that's also one of the special aspects of the course that I think attracted both of us to try to teach it at this level. Now, sometimes simple clues can offer a way into the complex and difficult problems of origins. And so, for example, I'm going to show you next slide. One of the difficult things of understanding the origin of life is we're made up of very simple elements that get progressively more complicated, atoms to molecules, etc. And one of the things that's remarkable is this. So here we have a diagram of just lots of stars, and if you use the right sort of telescopes, you can actually detect fairly large molecules floating around in free space. So chemistry organizes itself without any prompting from anybody or anything, except a little bit of energy. And so here's these molecules that are floating around up there, and they're rather more complicated ones as well. So the self-assembly of molecules into larger molecules is just something that seems to happen anywhere and everywhere, even in the deep, deep, mostly empty, freezingly cold free space. So that gives us a clue that building the building blocks of life might actually be fairly straightforward rather than impossibly difficult. And so one of the aspects of the study of origins is how to sort of slip into the problem with clues like this one. So I sort of play Sherlock Holmes often, trying to get a sense of how things work or not. Now, while this course is not fundamentally going to be mathematical, it's still going to require notation and concepts, particularly in deep time and space. And so Elliot's going to explain a little bit about how we're going to deal with the level of scientific notation for the course.
So when we deal with astronomy and biology, one of the things we have to do is grapple with numbers that are both very big, the size and age of the universe, and very small, the size of DNA, the size of the atoms that make up DNA. And so one way to handle that, one way to describe very big and very small numbers, is to use these metric prefixes, which encode either very large or very small. So we'll make use of things like giga-years, which is 1 billion years. So giga represents 1 billion, mega 1,000,000, kilo 1,000. And on the small side, there are analogous things that we'll use. Centimeters, which is 1/100th of a meter. Millimeters, 1/1000th of a meter. Nanometers, 1 billionth of a meter. And there's lots of these metric prefixes, right? We're not going to be using the more extreme ones like yocto and zepto, right? We're really just going to make use of the common ones, the ones you're probably somewhat familiar with already from high school or everyday life, terawatts, things like that. One of the other things that we're going to emphasize a lot is your ability to read and comprehend scientific plots that are trying to convey scientific information. And the reason for this is really that we think this is an important skill for you to simply be an educated member of the public. When you read the newspaper or Time Magazine or Newsweek and they have a scientific plot explaining something about global warming or some other aspect of science that's affecting public policy, we want you to be able to interpret that scientific plot. And there are many ways to present the same information in a scientific plot. And so depending on the information you're trying to convey, one way of plotting up that information may be more useful than another. And so I want to give you an example. So this is a plot showing the amount of mass in different elements in the periodic table throughout the universe. So is the universe, the normal matter in the universe, is it mostly lead? That'd be kind of weird. Is it mostly hydrogen? Is it mostly iron? Right? On Earth, okay, the atmosphere is a lot of nitrogen and oxygen. Maybe the universe is mostly nitrogen and oxygen. What you can see from this plot is that, in fact, the percentage of mass in different elements in the universe, this is versus the atomic number, the type of element it is, how many protons are in the nucleus, how many electrons are flying around the protons. We'll come back to this a little bit later in the class. And you can see very easily that, wow, the universe is actually mostly hydrogen, helium. Maybe there's a little blip here, and if you count up, that's actually oxygen. But then maybe if you're at the very front and you have really good eyesight, maybe you lost it. Yeah, there you can see that that's actually a tiny bit up. So what do you get from this plot? You get that most of the universe is actually made of hydrogen and helium, and then everything else is pretty small. Here's exactly the same data, the same facts, the same information, plotted in a different way. This is plotted using scientific notation and using what's called a logarithmic plot. So in a logarithmic plot, as you go up and down the y-axis, the differences go down, in this case, by factors of 10. This is 100%. This is 100 times smaller, 1%. Yet 100 times smaller, 0.01%. Yet 100 times smaller, 10 to the minus 4. This is scientific notation, where you express decimal points as 10 raised to the something. And the first section and reading next week will kind of review this scientific notation. The thing I want you to notice here is that for this information, there's actually a lot more conveyed by this logarithmic plot, because you can see the very small abundance of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, gold, lead, uranium. All of these other elements in the periodic table, elements that we value a lot on Earth, gold, right? You couldn't tell how much gold was in the universe from this plot. It's so small, near zero. But here, in this logarithmic plot, where you can convey a much broader range of how much stuff is there in different elements, you can tell that there's a certain amount of gold, actually about 10 million times less than the amount of hydrogen. You can read off that iron seems to be a little more common than other elements near it in the periodic table. And this is actually a big clue to where the elements come from in the first place. And so in this case, how we choose to convey the information in a linear plot or a logarithmic plot really changes the type of information that you can convey. And so we want you, and that's really what one of the foci will be in next week's section, is to be comfortable reading linear plots and logarithmic plots, and to at least be somewhat comfortable with scientific notation so you can know how to think about and write down very big numbers and very small numbers. Okay? Okay. Another comment is that when we talk about things in the universe, when we talk about how big something is, how much it weighs, how far away it is, how old it is, we have to choose a system of units in which to express physical quantities. So the system of units that we're going to use is called the metric or System International, SI, system of units. This is kind of the scientific standard for the system of units. So this is not, for instance, the British system of units where you talk about foot-pounds and furlongs and fortnights. This is a system of units where we talk about time in seconds, length in meters, which is about 3.3 feet, and mass in kilograms, about 2.2 pounds. And even these units, you will see as we go through the class, are actually not that useful when you talk about astronomy, physics, biology, and geology. And the reason is that this system of units was basically developed for describing everyday experience and laboratory experiments in, the 19th century. And so when you're talking about, for instance, geology, when things happened in the very distant past, it becomes pretty cumbersome to use seconds. So if I wanted to tell you when the dinosaurs went extinct, that's about 2 times 10 to the 15 seconds. And that is not a very convenient way to express that information. So one thing I could do is I could go back to my handy metric prefixes, look up 10 to the 15, that's a peta, and so I could get kind of geeky and say, all right, this is about 2 petaseconds ago. All right, that's one way to do it, an actually easier way to do it in this case, and mostly what we'll actually do when talking about time, is to express it in mega years or giga years. So 2 times 10 to the 15 seconds is about 65 million years, 6 times 10 to the 7 years, and that's about 65 mega years. So the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, about 65 mega years ago, and the way geologists often describe time is they express it as 65 mega annum ago, so MA for mega annum, where mega annum is really another way, mega is kind of meant to invoke mega annual, so it's really another way of saying mega years. But you'll see this in some of the readings, mega annum and mega years.
That's the notation we use,
Yep.
but the way we say it is millions of years ago. We don't even bother with the mega or the giga. We just say million and billion. So,
See, as an astronomer, I wasn't actually sure about that.
yeah.
Okay. So this sounds kind of dry, but this actually turns out to be extremely important. To give you one example of why you better keep track of your units, in 1998, NASA launched a satellite called the Mars Climate Orbiter that was meant to go orbit around Mars and measure the atmosphere and climate of Mars. Missions to Mars, as we will describe later in the course, are extremely exciting. There's evidence of ice currently on the surface of Mars. There's evidence of flowing water on the surface of Mars in the past. And so we really want to study and characterize the surface and atmosphere of Mars. The problem in this case is that 2 different teams of engineers, which were part of this Mars Climate Orbiter, were using different systems of units. One of them was using SI units to describe the thrusters, the engines of the satellite, and the other was using basically English units, so pounds and foot-pounds and things like that, to describe the kind of strength of the thrusters. And so there was a miscommunication between the 2 different parts of the team, which led to, when the satellite got into orbit and tried to settle into orbit, and they fired the engines, it crashed and burned up, and wasted hundreds of millions of dollars, and ruined our opportunity of learning more about Mars's climate, all because the teams didn't use a common system of units. So I suspect nothing that catastrophic will happen to you in this class if you use the wrong system of units, but we really do want you to pay attention that whenever you describe a physical quantity, you should think about what units you're using, and in particular, we're going to be using largely this SI system of units, meters, kilograms, seconds, or in many cases actually units that are a little more comfortable and natural for biology and astronomy and geology, things like megayears.
We could try to develop a Harry Potter midterm exam where every time you write the wrong unit, that part of the paper bursts into flame.
So, that would be fun, yes. Okay. So what we want to do now is provide you a little bit more of a flavor for some of the major themes that we're going to cover in the class. Both themes for the class as a whole, and then themes more specific to some of the astronomy, geology, and biology aspects of the course.
Okay, so one of the overarching themes of the course is that the universe is incredibly complex. Thank you. It's incredibly complex. But luckily and fortunately, it seems to be that much of the complexity is governed by a modest number of relatively simple principles. Darwin's theory of evolution, E equals mc squared, Newton's laws of mechanics, gravity, the fact that things are made of atoms, etc. And so one of the tensions we're going to have to deal with in this course is how to capture the genuine complexity of the universe and how to describe it in a way that both is powerful and helpful. And so obviously we're going to be centering mostly on these things that dramatically reduce the complexity to some sort of manageable form. There's also going to be contrasting themes. The universe is about 13.7 billion years old. The Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. So if you could wind back the clock about 500 million years before that, there's really no fundamental difference in the nature of the universe at that time, even though there's no Earth yet, or at least not an Earth-like planet that happens to be our planet. So in terms of the universe and the principles, nothing has happened for most of the history of the universe, and then about 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth forms. So astronomy is dominated by vast numbers of relatively few fundamental types of objects, most of which had their origins in the deep, deep past. Biology is dominated by large numbers of incredibly complex, hierarchically organized objects, most of which have relatively recent origins. So deep origins of fundamental elements, objects in the universe, recent origins in universal time of complex, organized things in biology. So two very different timescales, two very different ways of natures in which origins occurred. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to say then a little bit more about some of the astronomical themes that we're going to cover. And one of them that's actually quite central is this notion that really astronomy is a historical science. And the reason it is that it takes light a certain amount of time to travel from one object to another. So when I press the laser pointer, it actually takes light a certain amount of time to travel from the laser pointer, reflect off the wall, bounce into your eyes. That happens very fast. It's like a billionth of a second, a little bit longer than a billionth of a second, so you don't notice it. But when we're dealing with things as big as the universe as a whole, the fact that it takes light time to travel from one place to another is actually extremely important. Because what it means is when we look up at the sky and look at more distant objects, we are seeing objects as they were in the past. They're further away. It took light further to get to us. That means we're seeing them today as they were when the light originated a very long time ago. And so it's this astonishing fact that sitting here on this one little irrelevant puny planet, just looking up at the sky, we can trace out the history of the universe using the fact that it takes light a certain amount of time to travel from distant objects to us. And that aspect of astronomy is really critical to how we can unravel our astronomical history using just observations here and now on the surface of the Earth. Another major theme is the notion of what really is our place in the universe. So there was, of course, the great Copernican revolution, when the fundamental viewpoint of the Earth's position in the universe shifted from one in which the Earth was at the center of the universe to one in which the Earth is no longer at the center of the universe. And the sun, instead, is the center of the solar system, and everything is orbiting around the sun. And what you'll see is that in many ways, the history of astronomy, as we figure out our origins, is a history of a series of Copernican revolutions, where as we understand our context, the place of our planet, the Earth, our sun, the solar system, our galaxy, as we understand the place of those objects with respect to everything else that exists in the universe, we see that any notion that we're kind of a privileged object in the universe has to be discarded. And that's the sense in which I mean a series of Copernican revolutions. And then lastly, of course, one of the real fundamental themes of the class is thinking about the origin of everything in the universe. How did it come to be? How does it change in time? How do things evolve from what we loosely call the beginning, the Big Bang? And I'll explain that there's a sense in which that is the beginning, and there's a sense in which it really isn't. And we'll come back to that. How do we go from then until now, 13.7 billion years after the Big Bang, and what is likely to happen going forward into the future? So what is our picture now of kind of the place of the Earth in the solar system relative to the other things that exist in the universe? This is our sun. These are some of the planets in the solar system. This is not really to scale. The planets are actually quite far away from the sun. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Our sun is one of just billions of stars in our galaxy. This is actually a picture looking up at the sky of the stars, the billions of stars that make up our own galaxy. Our galaxy, which contains billions and billions of stars and planets, is one of just billions and billions of galaxies that we can see in the visible universe. The Earth is not at the center of the solar system. The sun is roughly at the center of the solar system. But the sun is not at the center of the galaxy. It's out in kind of a backwater part of the galaxy. Not only that, our galaxy is not actually a particularly special galaxy relative to all of the other galaxies we see in the universe. And this is the sense in which, as we learn more and more about our place in the universe, we recognize that there's really nothing privileged or special about us. This just happens to be the planet we're on, but there's nothing special about that relative to all of the other stars and galaxies and planets. And Carl Sagan and Douglas Adams, I think, both said this very nicely. So Carl Sagan said, "For all of our conceits about being the center of the universe, we live on a routine planet of a humdrum star stuck away in an obscure corner of an unexceptional galaxy, which is one of about 100 billion galaxies." That is the fundamental fact of the universe we inhabit, and it's very good for us to understand this. And this is a real distinction from the kind of historical origin stories that most cultures had, where there was really a privileged place for humankind in that origin story. And that, we think, is not true in our current understanding of science. So if this makes you a little depressed, I'll pile it on. Not only are we kind of unexceptional, but the stuff we're made of isn't even the stuff that most of the universe is made of. We are made of atoms in the periodic table. We are bags of water with iron in our blood, hydrogen, oxygen, iron, things like that are made of atoms or elements in the periodic table. That accounts for only about 4% of the stuff that actually exists in the universe. Most of the universe is something fundamentally different from atoms or elements in the periodic table or the stuff that we're familiar with from everyday experience on Earth. It's stuff that we call dark matter and dark energy. This dark stuff constitutes about 96% of the total mass, the total amount of stuff in the universe. And how we know this and why we think this and what we think this dark stuff really is one of the major things that we'll get to when we talk about the universe as a whole. Okay. And so then lastly, of course, is this notion that we really want to understand not just what is there, not just that there are billions of stars and billions of galaxies and billions of plants on the Earth, many, many different species, but we want to understand where does it come from. Where do the stars, the asteroids, the Milky Way, the amazing diversity of plants that we see on our own planet, where does all of this actually originate? And just to give you a feel for how really vast astronomical scales are and how many different stars and planets and galaxies there really are, I want to show you a picture of what looks at first to be a rather dull part of the sky. So this is the moon. This is all the little points here are mostly stars in the sky. And this little red thing is called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. So there was a Hubble Deep Field, but that wasn't deep enough. Then there was the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. Astronomers, you will see as we go through the class, are not all that creative, and so they tend to call things ultra and super and this and that. So this is the ultra deep field. It's the deepest picture of the universe ever taken with any telescope. So now I'm going to show you what this little patch looks like with the Hubble Space Telescope. This tiny little patch, which is small compared to the size of the moon, actually, when you look with the Hubble Space Telescope, has tens of thousands of galaxies in it. This is that same patch of sky viewed with the Hubble Space Telescope, and it is filled with galaxies, thousands and thousands of galaxies. Zoom in to a small patch of that already small patch, and you can start to really see the individual galaxies. And because as you look at fainter and fainter objects, you see objects further and further back in time, the Hubble Space Telescope picture of this little patch of the sky is actually showing us these galaxies as they were billions and billions of years ago. And this just gives you a sense of the extraordinary range of how many galaxies there are. They come in all different kinds, some of them spirally, some of them red, some of them blue. These are actually roughly real color images. Each of these galaxies probably has billions of stars and billions of planets, many planets like our own. And we'll start to see that towards the end of the class how we're really now able to discover and characterize planets like Earth around other stars. So we're starting to understand not just that there are other galaxies, but that there are many other planets like our own orbiting around other stars. So lastly, one of the themes that really bridges the astronomical and the biological aspects of the course is, where do the building blocks for life come from? Life requires complex molecules, carbon-based molecules. It requires carbon and hydrogen, iron in our blood. Where do those elements come from? And it turns out that those elements come from astronomical objects. Hydrogen and helium, the most abundant elements in the universe, the most abundant of the normal stuff that is actually irrelevant, because most of the universe is dark matter and dark energy, but the most abundant normal stuff in the universe is hydrogen and helium, and then other elements important for life, carbon and iron. All of these come from astronomical objects. The hydrogen and helium we think was forged in the first few minutes after the Big Bang. So 13.7 billion years ago, when the Big Bang happened, the universe was expanding, it was extraordinarily hot. That's when the hydrogen and helium was mostly formed. Most of the other elements in the periodic table, especially the things important for life, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, those were formed in stars by nuclear fusion processes in stars. And so we'll understand as we go through the course, how is it that stars build up all of the elements in the periodic table, starting from the kind of humble beginnings of just hydrogen and helium. And that really sets the stage then for the origin and evolution of life, because the astronomical objects create all of the fundamental building blocks needed for life.
So the biological themes are going to center largely around the incredible complexity of life, from the simplest organisms to organisms like ourselves. And so here's just a characterization of a single cell. We're not going to do the detailed anatomy of a cell. That's way beyond the scope of this course. But one thing I want to try to convey to you is just how complex life really is. And so within cells, there's basically biochemistry that operates. And here is a chart of the biological processes that go on inside your body. So it is unbelievably complex. Does anybody memorize this? No, in the same way that nobody memorizes the phone book or a dictionary. But we're incredibly complicated, and the evolution of those things and their maintenance is really quite spectacular. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. Part of the complexity arises actually from the fact that biology is organized hierarchically: atoms to molecules to cells to organs to organisms to ecosystems. And so we'll be looking at that a little bit, and here's a characterization of that complexity, starting with the atoms that Elliot will be telling us about, to the formation of molecules, to the origin of cells, which is an incredibly hard and difficult to understand step, tissues, all the way up to ecosystems. So that hierarchical organization makes analysis very, very difficult, because we all depend on functions at all of these different levels. Another theme that's going to dominate the course is the fact that all organisms on Earth, as far as we know, are related to each other. So that includes things like us, ourselves, to things like this. So anybody know what this is? The pink bit is the tip of a pin, photographed up close, and the yellow bits are bacteria on the tips of the pin. So next time you get a pin, hold it up and look at it, and you can see that the bacteria are not too far outside of your visual acuity. Those are our ancestors. That's what we started off looking like. And now we've become like the way we look like. So we go from things like that to things like this in ourselves. And so one of the themes in this course is, how does that process happen? What are the rules, the regulations? What's the rate at which it occurs? And so it's possible to build trees that relate the origin of all living things, starting off with the origin of the Earth to the first life. Time is going in this direction, in both directions, accumulating in all the species that we see on planet Earth, of which we are just one among millions. So like astronomy, we also deal in these huge numbers, of which we are just a small part. One of the weird things, though, about the origins of us is that while life is almost as old as the Earth itself, and we find the earliest evidence of life is almost as old as the earliest possibility of us finding it, that it's only in the most recent past that humans have emerged. So all this vastness of the universe and the vastness of time, our place is really minuscule, both spatially and temporally. And so one of the things we'll be looking at is, how do we know that organisms are related to each other? And so what I want to do now is just try to give you some sort of physical sense of the duration of time. And so what we're going to do here is, this is a roll of tissue that you find in the euphemism or the WC or the little closet or the water closet or whatever you call it in this country. And so if you can just pass that backwards and forwards.
You spared no expense.
And so that roll of paper there is about 400 sheets. And so at the beginning we have here the origin of the Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. So each sheet, each single sheet, represents about 10 million years on this time scale. And so one of the questions is, how many sheets does it take before the origin of Earth? The origin's there at the beginning. So what's your guess as to how long? How many sheets did it take?
Is that the origin of Earth or origin of the universe?
I'm going to do origin of Earth.
Okay.
Origin of Earth. So the origin of the universe is 13.7 billion. So that's another what? Another about 4 or 5 rolls of toilet paper. Oops, I said it. Back in that direction there. So 4 or 5 rolls, and then this roll shows up, and then we start to unwind it. So how many sheets does it take before we... I think it's an interaction between the two microphones. we got, how many sheets does it take before we get the origin of life? Is it 1 sheet? Is it 10 sheets? Turns out it's about 80 sheets. It takes a long time for the surface of the Earth to cool and consolidate. And after that, it looks like Earth originates fairly quickly, maybe just a few sheets worth. So then there's something called the Cambrian explosion, which is the origin of all the complex animals in a fairly brief period of time. We call it evolution's Big Bang. And the question is, where is the Big Bang on the toilet roll? How many sheets from the end, from the present, does it take? So there's 400 sheets. So how many sheets does it take before the origin of complex animals? Takes about, another guess? So this is actually, let's do it from the beginning. So you're saying 395? You're saying 395, right? So 395, 300, 110. Yeah, so that one says that the origin of complex life quite quickly followed the origin of life. So 80 sheets. Turns out it's at about 352. So 352 sheets. So what about the origin of the genus Homo, Homo erectus? How many sheets ago? Okay, so so 399 point how much? 0.8 or 9? Ah, dear, oh dear. I think your paper's not going to explode into flames. 399.75. So, yeah. Oh dear. So next time you look at a sheet of toilet paper and you've got the whole roll there, origin of Homo's the last quarter of the last sheet. So what about the Egyptian pyramids? How far are the Egyptian pyramids? Yeah, they're about the length of the average bacterium. One of those little orange dots that I showed you. And actually, it's a little bit longer than the length of the Ebola virus, which goes, well, actually, from a very long Ebola virus. It varies greatly in length. So you can't see a bacterium. You can't see the history of the pyramids, even on a single sheet of toilet paper. And then what about your own life? I'm going to assume your average age in this room is about 20. So how long is 20 years on that? It's about 0.2 microns. So the size of a very small virus. So they give you a sense of the vastness of geologic time. And yet here we are with remarkable capacity with our transformation of the planet in this huge universe right now. So in some ways, while in space and in time there's nothing special about us, we are remarkable in our incredible complexity and capacities in this one point of time and this one point of space. And this is going to be very important as we start to ask questions about how likely is it that there is other life like us out there in the universe. And so think about those time scales and how ephemeral we are and how long it took to reach of us when we think about the origin of life in the rest of the universe. And so there's the same information there. I was going to say, too, we will be posting lecture slides after the lectures for these things. The final 2 comments is that unique events turn out to be really important in the history of life, and that will be one of the themes. So, for example, it appears that a meteorite striking the Earth about 65 million years ago paved the way for the evolution of humans. And so what seems to have happened about 65 million years ago is we were struck by a meteorite about the size of Mount Everest, and that pleased to have played a major role in the extinction of the dinosaurs that created the ecological opportunity for mammals that had been there for 165 million years to now emerge as the dominant life forms in terrestrial ecosystems. No meteorite, dinosaurs still today, maybe none of us. So rare events seem to play a critical role in the history of our own species and of life. So that's another one of the themes. And then finally, at the end of the course, while we look at the likelihood of life in the rest of the universe, we're also going to look at humans as planet transformers. And so in daylight, it's harder to see the evidence of our transformation of the planet. You can see the Great Wall of China. You can see the Caldecott Mine. Anybody know the Caldecott Mine? Anybody from Utah? So sitting next to Salt Lake City, you often fly over it as you land in the city. So there are a few objects that we've created on Earth where you can see our evidence. But if you look at the dark side of the planet, our evidence of our activity is incredibly easy to see. City lights here. So this, I think, that's Long Island sitting there. That's New York City, Philadelphia. This is cloud coming across up from the south. And so one of the things we want to look at the end is our capacity and why we have that capacity to transform the planet, which I think is one of the great social concerns of our time. And so finally, what we've done, Elliot found this really great video, which in some respects I think captures both the spirit and the themes that we wish to encapsulate in this course. And what we want to do is show this video now, and I hope as the course unfolds, you'll begin to understand how each of the images selected was selected and what they mean and how they came to be.